Okay, hi and
Recording is on.
hi and really thanks for inviting me and thanks for the kind words. So thanks to Game Studies India and Svik Mukherjee for inviting me to this awesome session. My name is Vit Sisler, as you heard. I am both academic. I am a scholar of game studies based in Prague, and I primarily in my career I did research on various representations in video games. How, for example, is Middle East represented and Middle Eastern history represented in video games. And I did some research on educational video games. But beyond that, I'm also a game designer. I'm a co-founder of Charles Games, which is a spin-off of Charles University. It's like a game studio focusing on developing serious games. And today, I will in my talk, I will overlap both perspectives. So I will use, going from academic to my experiences being game designer. And I will talk about primarily about experience we did while designing critical and serious game about Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia during the Second World War, Attentat 1942, and I will try to revisit some challenges and problems we've met during development and how we dealt it and how it shaped the outcome. So, yeah, that's Attentat 1942. I would like to start briefly with a few theoretical concepts, just to kind of give you some frame. Where are we now? First is the concept of ludic century, which is a manifesto by Eric Zimmerman from 2013. And essentially, Eric Zimmerman argued that in 20th century, which was the century of information, movies were the dominant form of popular culture, like that kind of like most of our popular imaginary and like understanding and understanding of the world came from books and movies. And he's arguing that now in 21st century, there's like a shift of paradigm, and more video games or game-like experiences are actually becoming the primary source of entertainment, the way how we spend leisure time, consume art, design, etc., etc. This is important when talking about history, especially about popular history. And popular history is something like, typically you study history when you are in school, but once you leave school, unless you're a scholar of history or unless you directly read historical books and historical, like you are really kind of interested in recent historical research, your mental models of how certain historical events evolved or how certain periods look like are to a large extent influenced by popular historical novels, movies, books, whatever. And today, as Adam Chapman has argued, today historical video games are becoming one of the most widespread and one of the most successful forms of popular history, especially for younger generation. To say it in different words, for what for me used to be movies, for example, when I had some image about Second World War, typically these images came from war movies, which we used to watch, particularly, for example, from Soviet war movies, because I was born in a socialist Czechoslovakia. For contemporary generation, these images might, at least for some portion of the generation, primarily come from historical video games dealing and reconstructing Second World War. If you look at the video game production, especially the mainstream video game production, there are tons of games which deal with real historical events or use real historical frameworks as a backdrop or background for their stories. And particularly Second World War is typical, is like a popular topic in historical video games. And many of these games boast their realism. They kind of advertise themselves as the very authentic and realistic reconstruction of the historical events or of the war events. But importantly, if you look at most of these war games, you will discover that there is a huge realism in terms of weaponry, in terms of geography, topography, visual representation of the war. But there is some kind of huge kind of focus on the technology of war. So these games are mostly focusing on combat, and they on the strategic and tactic level of combat. But there are whole parts of human experience of what is it being in war or being affected by war, which are excluded from these games, which are missing, which are not represented. This actually had led great scholar from Tromsø, Helger Poch, to articulate the concept of selective realism, saying that these games, even though they might be ultra realistic on the layer of weaponry, shading, physical models, they selectively exclude certain negative and challenging aspects of war and violence, and kind of invite for pleasurable experience of play that avoid difficult ethical decisions. What is typically missing or excluded from these games are different perspectives, like perspectives of civilians, particularly women and children. In most games you don't find these topics, or they are not definitely central. Then the broader context of war. You kind of have the war as a combat between armed men, but what is the broader context, the consequences of war? What will happen after the war, etc., etc. These, or how is the war perceived by civilians? That's mostly missing. So when we started doing or working on Attentat, we knew we want to make a different game. You can call it serious game or documentary game or critical game. Essentially, there are a few concepts we knew about, and or which can be used to kind of describe what we wanted to do. One is like the concept of Alexander Galloway. He coined the concept of like realistic game, that could be the games that reflect critically on the minutiae of real life, repleted as it is with struggle, personal drama, and injustice. Or Jan Bogos and Sidney Porenbach actually talked about the possibility of creating documentary games or authentic games that could be authentic representation of lived experience. And to what extent is this possible in the video game medium? It has to be said that there are few games today which strive to do that, and I would say they are remarkable. One of the most important would be This War of Mine. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this game. This War of Mine, made by Polish 11-bit studio, is a game in which you manage a group of civilians which are in a besieged city in a civil war, and you simply try to survive. Like day after day, you try to get resources, get something to eat, and not die. This game, although it's fictitious, is based on the testimonies of people from besieged Sarajevo, from the war in former Yugoslavia. And then recently there is a game, Through the Darkest of Times, by Berlin-based Pain Bucket Studio, which is a brilliant game about civilian resistance to the Nazi regime in Germany. So we are playing like a group of, for example, communists or social democrats, or like any people who tried to struggle towards the regime, and the game mostly can't be won. It's only like depending on how you play the game, you can still be sent to Eastern Front or die, but sometimes you can live to the end of the war, and that's actually another brilliant game. So there are like few examples of games which try to do that and try to show you the broader consequences. But when we started working on Attentat, there haven't been much of guidelines or examples or like kind of roles we could follow. So we struggled with so many challenges, and I will try in this talk to kind of revisit these challenges and talk about them, and how the way we decided to solve them shaped the way the game it is now. By no means this what I was talking about should be perceived as a framework we had ready when we started developing the game. It's more something which by numerous tests and fails and dead ends, we kind of struggle to find the final format. So the final format actually was born during several years of development, consultations, and playtests. Here, before actually continuing, I would like to show you the trailer to Attentat 1942, so you know kind of what I'm talking about. So.
byla strašná doba tenkrát.
Co si dovolíte? Děkoho jsem neudělal, dejte mě pokoj!
Odboj, to přece byla vlastenecká povinnost.
Pak dědu odvedli a já jsem si nikdy nemyslela, že ho uvidím až po válce.
Proč vašeho dědu zatkli, to jsme se vlastně nikdy nedopátrali.
Byl to zlej sen. Takže se ani nedivím tvýmu dědečkovi, že o tom nechce mluvit.
Okay. So, what is the game about? It's like it's a single player, like a narrative-based video game in which you essentially talk to different survivors of Second World War, and by talking to them, you try to figure out what happened to your grandpa, what happened to your granddad during the war, because your grandpa was arrested by Gestapo immediately after the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich, who Reinhard Heydrich was, Czechoslovakia was occupied by Nazi Germany during the war, and they installed a rights protector. So like they installed the deputy director, who was kind of the highest ranking Nazi official governing the protectorate, and Reinhard Heydrich was also a lead architect of the Holocaust. And in 1942, the Czechoslovak government in exile in London, they sent paratroopers trained in Britain, Czech and Slovak paratroopers, who assassinated Reinhard Heydrich, or they killed him in an attack. He later died in a hospital. He was critically wounded during the attack, and which was one of the, I think it was the only one of the most important successful assassination of a highest Nazi official during the war. And the Nazis actually they answered with a wave of brutal reprisals. So they started to execute. They executed a lot of people, sent 3,000 Jews to the east, to the camps to the east, and arrested tens of thousands, arrested a lot of people. So there was like a really very kind of dark and brutal atmosphere in the protectorate. And our game is actually focusing not on the act of assassination itself, so not on the heroic act of the assassination, but we are more talking about how normal people lived during that period. How they lived in day-to-day life in the occupied protectorate before and after the assassination. So we actually did not design the game ourselves. We coupled with a team of historians from the Institute of Contemporary History of the Czech Academy of Sciences. So we some top professional historians, experts on that period on board. And it's important to say that they actually, during the development process, we first thought the historians would be kind of like consultants. They will give us some materials, they make some research, and we will write the game. It didn't work at all. The stories we tried to write were not realistic and not really evolving in the direction we wanted. So finally, we kind of persuaded the historians to become game designers. So they wrote huge chunks of the game, which we then modified to be for example, more playable, but they wrote a lot of text for the game themselves. So in the game, what you actually do, as I said, you don't really replay the history, but you play the game in the present time and the present time is year 2001, when you discover kind of like you discover that your grandpa was taken to the camps after the assassination, and no one in the family really knows why and what exactly happened, because he never talked after he returned from the camps after the war. He never talked about it much, and now he's in hospital. He's not talking much, and you try to discover what happened. So you talk to your relatives, you talk to his colleagues from resistance, to his colleagues from work, from factory, and to your neighbors, and you try to figure out what happened. And depending on whom you ask and how you frame the question, so it's like kind of like interactive movie. Like a huge part of the game is interactive movie, when you choose different answers, and based on how you framed what you say, like the survivor will tell you something else. And they're like interactive comics, and there are more playable parts we call playable memories. So to some extent you play the past, but not only as a memory. So the past is fixed. It happened as it happened. This game is not counterfactual, so we don't allow you to change his story and do something differently than it really happened. Still kind of we struggled how to do that, how to achieve this kind of authentic game, or serious authentic experience of the occupation. And or fundamental for us were these three principles, which I will talk about. As I said, these are not principles we had in mind from the beginning. It's more like something which evolved from the process itself. The most important challenge for developing such a game is the question of authenticity, because how you can recreate authenticity in a video game, or can be historic representation of the past be authentic in a video game. When we are talking, if you have like written testimonies, it's clear. Like if you have written testimonies, or if you have like a documentary movie, for example, the lens-based media, there is certain fidelity, because you simply you document something which is there happening, and of course we know that you edit it. You as an author of documentary, of course you tell a story, and kind of depending on how you edit it, what you omit, what you include in the documentary, you are shaping the certain perception of the past. But there is this kind of like veracity of the material itself. In a video game, most commonly you have to recreate stuff. You have to model. You have to, like, video games are models. They are essentially rule systems which model certain experience, and so they are always recreations. And by creating a model, you are always kind of schematizing, because you have to decide what you will include in your model and what you will exclude, because a model is like not one-to-one representation of the thing. So this was a huge issue for us, how to deal with that. And we actually, as I said, in the game, we finally decided we won't allow you as a player to replay the past, for example, in some 3D environment. That we will kind of, the past will be fixed. The past will be transmitted to you only through memories of people you can talk to in the present time. And the present time is 2001, because in 2001, people who lived through the Second World War were still among us, which is unfortunately not always the case now. So that's why we set the present time to 2001, because the testimonies we had from 90s and also from the early 2000s were like kind of available at that period. So you talk to all people who lived through the war, and as I said, you ask different questions. And here was a huge challenge. Like we had professional historians, and we have literally thousands of real testimonies from that period. So the question was, should we use these real testimonies? Should we like recreate these situations based on the real witnesses? And after quite a long debate, we decided not to, and we decided for a solution, which is that the game is based on personal testimonies, but we don't. But the people you are talking to in our game, they are constructs. They are fictitious. They have fictitious names, and they are played by actors. Also because they, as I said, we shot the game in 2015-16. We used actors. But we typically do. We took real testimonies, and while our historians wrote the dialogue, they combined different testimonies and different details to create one like kind of authentic experience. So I would say it could be labeled it's like a fictitious assemblage of real testimonies, but the person you're talking to never existed. It has fictitious name. The reason is that particularly the reasons are two. Actually, one is ethical, and of course, like we can't make a game out of real testimonies unless we have first consent of these people that there will be a game based on that. And second, once you have a real testimony, you can't change it because that's how the person told it. And in our game, we needed various answers. For example, if you ask this way, if you behave impolitely, if you're not sensitive enough, this person tell you something else, or might behave differently. And if we want to model that, if we want to like model real dialogue, we need to change. We need to kind of some kind of authorial control over what the person tells you. And also there is this one, and there is also like kind of from production point of view, we knew we need to make the story together. And typically in the real testimonies, you have like they are not that dense. Typically, this person, like in our game, the people also talk what happened after the war in the communist times, and sometimes even after after 1989, after the Velvet Revolution, when the socialist Czechoslovakia ceased to exist. So we need kind of like a lot of details to combine them in one character. The important thing is that most games which try to be authentic kind of like obscure, or there's like a kind of try to make it as real as possible. We also, for ethical reasons, we decided to actually emphasize what is real historical research and what is our construct directly in the game. So we got a very rare digitized footage from the time of war and after war from the Czech National Film Archive. So we are using these segments when the game talks about something which happened really, about real people, about real situations which are well documented and researched. And then when our characters talk about some kind of personal memories or personal testimonies, we use black and white graphic novel segments. So everything which is constructed by us as game designers is made as a black and white comics. So you kind of clearly see what is real and what is not. And even when the actors actually in the present time talk, when they talk about the past, they show you some documents from the past. We also differentiate. Real documents are real documents. Documents which we constructed for them. For example, I don't know, ID card from the war, which is ID card of a fictitious character. The ID card is made as a prop for a graphic novel. So kind of constantly we remind you what is kind of real and what is our construct, to make it kind of clear. At the same time, in most details, we really followed, like our historians, when they were preparing the characters, they read, for example, 50 or sometimes even more testimonies, and then they wrote the memory of the character based on the real testimony. So it's like very close, and there are no historical events that didn't happen, etc. Then another quite important aspect is the aspect of multi-perspectivity or polyphony. We knew from the beginning that we want to show you the time period from personal but very different points of view. So we use different actors and to kind of give you different subjective testimonies which present diversified historical experience from various segments of the population. So in the game, you can talk to 8 different characters. And these characters present you not only with different personal story, but with different evaluation of the past. So how they perceive different things in the past can differ significantly. So you can talk to resistance fighters, to people who've been like in active armed resistance against the Nazis. You can talk to their victims. You can talk to people who've been Holocaust survivors. You can talk to people who lived kind of like life, the normal life, which was nevertheless still like unimaginably hard in occupied Prague, and they continue to work during occupation. But you also talk to people who, for example, in a way not necessarily collaborated, but they were somehow actively involved with the regime. For example, you can talk to journalists who wrote, articles about the assassination, and they were following the guidelines from the ministry. And today, when you talk to these people, they try to justify why they did what they did. And these, and of course, they approach with really different views of the past, and of personal responsibility, and etc. 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 This game actually has two versions. One version is like commercial version, which we sell on Steam, and it's on app, on iOS, Android, everything. And then we have another one, which is modified for Czech high school. So it's like kind of educational version. And we know from schools that particularly this character of the collaborator, is very, from the points of teachers, is a very productive character, because it sparks a lot of discussion about totalitarian regimes, about what is resistance, and what are the boundaries, and how would you behave under such circumstances, and constant threat of death and torture and everything. So these are various different perspectives we include. And kind of final important aspect of the game is its inclusiveness. We deliberately tried to include also like different voices, which are not necessarily marginalized, but not that present in the mainstream history popular discourse. So, for example, in Attentat, we have memories of a Roma lady who went through Poraimos, which is the Romani genocide by the Nazis during the Second War. So she's been also in the camps, and she talks in the game not only about her experience during the war, but also about the treatment of Romani population during socialist times, and about her, for example, experiences with racism even after revolution. So we have all these characters there, and it's kind of up to you. It's up to you to critically read them. These testimonies are very subjective. And they present history from kind of day-to-day perspective of an ordinary person, and you have to critically evaluate them, read them, and patch them together, and to kind of make your own conclusion about what happened exactly. The game has different endings. As I said, depending how you progress, whom you ask, you can or you cannot discover what happened to your grandpa, and there are different endings. One is, I would say, sort of happy end, which is still very emotional for me when I play the game, even when I'm the author, because I know that the background story, the background arc of the story is actually based on real story, which we researched. The important thing is that from the very beginning we decided that you can't play the past, and the reason for that, we're really thinking about that, like could be, for example, 3D game in which you really play in Nazi-occupied Prague and you make decisions. I think these games are definitely very powerful, which recreate past events, but there is a lot of ethical questions. Particularly, I was talking that game is a rule system. If you make a game in which you can directly go through these oftentimes very emotional loaded and ethical loaded testimonies, like testimonies from the camps, for example, you would have to break the human experience into a rule system. Essentially, you would have to say, if you do this, this will happen, and you have to assign different outcomes to different players' action. And that's not only extremely schematizing in some cases, but in some cases can be really offensive and insulting to people who live through this experience, because kind of you're presenting them sort of with an idea that people who made it, or people who lived through this time, could make right decisions, and kind of that you could kind of manage that these situations are manageable just by making the right decisions, which I would say is really ethically problematic. But I can definitely imagine games which are trying to do that and are doing it powerfully. But for various reasons, we decided that we'll keep it. That the story is mainly presented to you as a narrative, as a narrative and testimony, which is the very typical way how human beings share experiences. We have some really positive feedback from people playing the game. One interesting is that, especially in context of Czech Republic, when we talk about history is typically presented, especially when you're in school, when you're in school age, and history is kind of like a list of important dates and events. And many people tell us that by playing this game, they actually realize that, you know, there are people which lived through the whole second half of the 20th century. So they saw, you know, they saw Nazism, they saw the communist times, and then actually witnessed the Velvet Revolution and you know, kind of the return of a democratic Czechoslovakia and later on Czech Republic, and that they never kind of thought that this all can be, you know, lived in one life. That for them, these historical events are kind of isolated islands, because that's how we are taught history in schools. You know, there's Nazism, then there is communism, then there is this, and it's kind of like these are like pieces of history which are, of course, can be very well interconnected by one life. The other thing a lot of people told us is that this game actually moved them to go back to their own family and ask questions about the family past, like, you know, do you remember the war, or do you remember communist times and how it was, etc., etc. So it's kind of like there is this kind of like also intragenerational, I would say, potential in video games that you can talk about what you played. The game was, as I said, quite successful. We won several awards, including Czech Game of the Year and nomination to IGF in San Francisco. Just actually recently, if I may share the news, just a few days ago, we've been nominated for Apple Design Awards for in the category Games for Impact, which we are really proud of. The games which are in this category are awesome, and it's definitely an honor for us. So you can keep your fingers crossed. The finalists, the winners will be announced on June the 10th. And actually, the kind of success of the game also led to the establishment of Charles Games, and that's important because when we developed the game at Charles University and the Czech Academy of Sciences, so it was developed in an academia background, which is awesome for the support they gave us, and it's great for, you know, the vast resources of you know, historical research, archival materials we could use. But academia is kind of slow. It can be slow in some business decisions, and when you are in a game development, you need to be really agile. So finally, Charles University actually decided to establish a spin-off, Charles Games, which is a public-private partnership, and so we are now part of that, and we are continuing in this project under our own label. We are our own legal entity. The Charles Games, what we do is not only that we continue to develop historical games, which are continuation of the original project, but we also serve as an incubator for students of Charles University, because at Charles University, there is a game development program where students from different backgrounds, you know, programmers, game designers, graphic designers, they are put into teams and they make video games. And we kind of, Charles Games, serve as an incubator when the best teams with kind of like games which are promising, we help them to make it from the prototype to real product, which is there, for example, on Steam or on the market. And now our biggest project we're working on is a sequel to Attentat, which is called Svoboda 1945 Liberation. And Svoboda means freedom in Czech. So this game is about liberation of Czechoslovakia from the Nazis. The game is happening in one small village because Attentat was set mostly in Prague. Most of the events happened in Prague. So in this game, in Liberation, we take you to a small village in the Czech-German borderland. And in the game, you witness the liberation from Nazism, so the kind of the violence at the end of the war and the final fights, but also you witness what happened after the war. So after the war, millions of German-speaking Czech citizens were forcibly expelled from Czechoslovakia, and they were moved to Germany. And there was kind of a lot of violence, especially during so-called wild expulsion. And we talk about that because this village was heavily affected by that. Then the game is about the rise of communism to power, because the Communist Party, backed by the Soviet Union, actually won the elections immediately after the war in 1946. And 2 years later, in 1948, they made a coup d'état, so like a putsch, and the Communist Party took power in Czechoslovakia, and for the next 40 years, it became authoritarian regime. And again, particularly the villages were heavily affected by this change, because what the communists did, they started to form collective farms, like kolkhozes, something like kolkhozes in the Soviet Union. It was called differently in Czechoslovakia, but they were collective, state-run collective farms, and they were trying to force local small farmers to voluntarily enter these collective farms. And in most cases, again, there was a brutal oppression to the farmers. They were like kind of by various means forced to do that, and it really fundamentally changed the life of the village, and it impacted several families until today. That there are still families which are still impacted by the events which happened 50 years ago. And in our game, we deal with that. So these are the main issues our game is about. In the game, as in Attentat, in Svoboda, the main thing you do is that you talk to people and you listen to their very powerful stories or testimonies. There is more game elements, like in we really took the feedback from the players we had in Attentat. So Liberation is much more like a game. There is more you can do, more you can change, but essentially you have like, as a player, you have more agency to influence how the game progresses and to influence the story. And I would say from the point of view of multi-perspectivity, this game is even kind of more promising to experiment with that, because here we have more clearly defined different opinions. So, for example, typically in our game in the village, you can talk to a lady who has lived her whole life in Germany, and she was expelled from the village as a kid, and lost her parents during the process. Then you can talk to a soldier, who was actually on the Eastern Front, who fought the Nazis and saw the atrocities they did, and then was in the village as part of the unit, actually expulsing the Germans, to Germany. And of course, these two people give you completely different personal evaluation of what happened. The same goes with decollectivization. So you can talk to a small farmer whose family lost completely the property after the communist putsch, and then you talk to someone who was a brilliant communist and was believing that they are really building a better and more just society. And all these people live still, or their descendants live in the village, and they provide you with very radically different evaluations. And it's again up to, as a player, to critically read it and to make sense of what happened, and also understand that historical events can be perceived very differently by very different by different people. That's I would say the main kind of like message of the game, is to it really can help you to understand the complexity of past as a lived human experience. And also, in most cases, when we think about history, we tend to think that history is something set, is something distant and defined, something that happened. But in reality, actually, it's our deeds and actions and our decisions which make history. And again, that's we try to really kind of emphasize in the game. So if you're interested in the time is actually kind of going up, but if you're interested in Liberation game, you can wishlist us on Steam. We'd be really grateful. And I thank you for attention, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have regarding both games. So thanks.
So thank you, Vit, for a fascinating presentation and two fascinating games. Really, I mean, we are open for questions. You can use the raise hand function or use the chat box, and or you can just unmute yourself and ask questions if you so wish. So, yeah. Okay. So I will start by kind of one very quick question to Vit myself, while all of you are kind of like framing yours, which is that when we are talking about kind of contemporary history or kind of history that is kind of very close to us, and trying to present it with in this kind of multiplicity of voices, as it were. Now, I was also wondering if you would kind of look at something like a game which is dealing with a very contemporary situation like "Bury Me, My Love," which kind of is about kind of a refugee. Do you know this game, Vit? "Bury Me, My Love," of course. So I'm kind of thinking, how does that kind of presentation of I mean, I wouldn't know if one could call "Bury Me, My Love" journalism or history, but how would that differ from what you do with Svoboda and with Attentat?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say the Bring Me My Love is actually a brilliant game. I know the authors, and I think that they made awesome job. And games are, I think that's what is really. I think video games are a great medium for telling stories, and even the most intimate and personal stories of human existence. So, of course, if you make them right, like that's of course, like, but as a medium, it's for me now, video games are fully capable of telling any kind of stories, even though which were kind of not thinkable to tell through games several let's say decade ago. And these games are great. I think games can really help you to be there, to experience certain event or certain situation through, like, in the shoes or through the eyes of their actors, or of those who been to a situation, which is particularly strong element, and can really help in I would say, deeper understanding, on better understanding of the situation, that you can. That's also what people told us after playing Attentat. Then they can much better now imagine how it was like, or they have some kind of vivid mental image. What was it like to live during occupation? And they didn't get it from just, for example, from the historical books, which are focusing on facts, and not on, for example, emotions and how you felt during this event. So I think that's definitely possible. I see a difference. And that's of course the difference is it's a very thin line between contemporary reality and contemporary history, and we deal with events which are 50 years old, meaning we really have the luxury that we have historians who are trained in understanding or making sense this period. We have, or they have, through the historians, we have access to vast archival materials, like film to footage. So I would say we are able to construct kind of a rich picture. With the contemporary issues, I would say it's more about personal stories and emotions, but still, these games can be extremely powerful because they particularly provide you with experience you don't typically have. Like, for example, as a European, you don't have typically experience what is it to be a refugee, or what is it to go through civil war, etc., unless there been some horrible civil wars in Europe in the 90s. But for most Europeans, I would say that's a very distant memory of typically their grandparents. So that's great. There's actually a game trying to which I really appreciate. It's kind of old game. It's called Global Conflicts Palestine, and in a way, it was made by Danish Sears game company. It's not well known, but it was like, I was a small game, primarily leaning to like serious educational segment. But they try to educate Danish students about the background and history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And what you do in the game, you play a journalist, and you arrive to Jerusalem, and the only thing you do is that you talk to people. And again, depending whom you ask and how you frame the question, you get different answers. And then the game, this really strong element of the game is that after you return, you are asked by the game to write the article, and you can use different quotes, you can use different photos, you can shape the article really differently, and the game shows you, I would say, very in a shortcut, but quite effectively, the constructedness of mediated reality we live in, because you as a journalist, by kind of elevating or selecting certain aspects, you frame the what's happening there to people who are reading your work here. And that was something I particularly appreciated about it's a whole series called Global Conflicts. It's a whole series of games. They made more about Latin America, etc., etc. I think you can still maybe find them online. So yeah, so there are more games who I would say try to work with this principle, showing you some reality through different eyes.
Fascinating. I mean, I was watching this movie called The Man with the Iron Heart on Amazon Prime the other day, and there's a huge contrast between what Attentat does and the way in which this movie I actually stopped watching it because it seemed to be glorifying Heydrich rather than kind of well. But I mean, it's interesting that then this new, comparatively newer medium is actually engaging with history and making it seem more problematic, really, than any one-sided portrayal. I was wondering if anybody else has any questions or any comments or anything to say at the moment. I mean, do let me know. I was, I mean, that was the first kind of thing that I had about this contemporary history and journalism, but also perhaps. Actually, I don't want to hog all the time here. So if anybody does have a question, do please interrupt me. Just unmute yourself and interrupt me. But I mean, I was thinking of something which is as immensely traumatic as fascism. I mean, to kind of actually address that. I was actually recently reading a book by Hans Fallada called Alone in Berlin. I don't know how it translates, but it's a fascinating book which is kind of addressing what is happening in Nazi Germany, in Nazi Germany, in Berlin, rather. But I was thinking of kind of, a situation, a predicament such as fascism. How to kind of capture the enormity and the shock of how did you even kind of think of dealing with this, really? And secondly, there's an add-on question, which is I actually used Attentat to introduce as an introductory kind of way to talk about the Holocaust, but I was thinking of something such as the Holocaust, really. Would it be possible to make a game about the Holocaust? I'm also kind of naughtily also bringing in Adorno's purported comment, really. But yeah.
Well, yeah, that's a good question. There's actually quite recently there was an initiative. It's a grandson of a Holocaust survivor made a movie. I can send you a link later. I don't recall the names now. Made a movie which is like kind of like a testimony of his grandparents, and he is actually in an interview. He is mentioning that now for him he would like to transform these experiences into a video game as a kind of platform for new generations, for generations to be born or to come to understand the experiences of the Holocaust. And he's like seriously thinking about it. And I think now the medium is probably mature for that. We in our game, we deliberately, as I said, we deliberately didn't gamify the memory of Holocaust. So as you play the game, I would say we strive to be quite conservative in the way how the memories from the camps are transmitted. So in our game, you actually can find NGO which some time ago recorded testimony with your grandfather and he's talking about his experience from Terezin and from Auschwitz, and so you kind of access these testimonies that you are listening to a tape where someone is talking. So there are no game-like elements in that. And we did it on purpose. We didn't want to we didn't want to gamify that particular segment. But I think with if you kind of address the issue sensitively, I think such a game can be made. But definitely it won't be traditional game or game in a traditional sense. It's kind of like more about like e-commemoration or recently there's an US initiative which made virtual reality about Holocaust, and again they opted for a very conservative, I would say, and traditional approach, which I completely understand. So what they actually did, they recorded one of the, because the sad reality is that the direct eyewitnesses are leaving us, sadly, because of the time that's passing. So what they did, they recorded testimonies of a man who was a Holocaust survivor. I think he was from Poland. Now he lives in the US, and they recorded like hours and hours of different answers to this question, and then they constructed AI, which kind of you kind of interview this person, and you ask a question, and the AI tries to parse what are you asking about, and then place you a certain segment. So actually, you can explore the hours and hours of testimonies, not in a traditional way as a one huge material, but you can go directly. It feels, because of virtual reality and because of the AI, it feels very real. It feels almost as if you are talking to a witness. And this was kind of initiative trying to preserve the fragile memory and especially the feeling that you're talking to someone who's been there through digital media, simply for the reasons that the people are passing away. And I think that was I saw it in South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, and I was very impressed by this initiative. But again, it's in a way all these initiatives I'm talking about in our game, we are very sensitive and very cautious how we deal with the topic for reasons.
So again, fascinating kind of response, and I'm definitely going to check out this game. Check out this this virtual reality kind of presentation. I'm not sure if it's a game, but I mean, and but what intrigued me is what you mentioned about the hours and hours of kind of interviews. Now, you must have taken hours and hours of interviews as well, or kind of had access to a lot of archival material. Now, how do you then kind of make the conscious decision to kind of take some of this and leave some out? Really, how do you manage to construct this in the game? I was just kind of thinking. I mean, how does one convert a history book or an archive into a game? That's pretty much what you have done really successfully.
Well, yeah, there is of course the game can be the game has certain length. We can't really make everything what we wanted, but I would say the game is heavily edited. We shot much more materials, and the historians actually wrote much more dialogues than we were able to turn into games. So again, the biggest challenge, and that goes for any kind of historical work. The biggest challenge is the necessity of selection, that you always, from the almost infinite reality of testimonies, you have to select something. You have to select certain testimonies. You have to select certain people and base the game on them. And of course, by doing that, you are leaving other testimonies out. These decisions were very hard, and we had like 6 historians on team. And I would say in the initial phase of the project, we spent so many hours on debates what to include in the game and what to leave out. And still we have a huge unused material behind the game. Some of it we turned into encyclopedia. So when you play the game, anytime someone mentions some place, person, or concept, a small encyclopedia entry pops out. And if you click on it, you will get not the game information, but like kind of real factual information written by our historians about the subject. And the encyclopedia is like almost 300 entries for all the games combined. And it's kind of great result of a huge effort. I found the the virtual reality exhibition I was talking about is called The Last Goodbye, and it was made by Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. And it's they recorded survivor Pinkas Guter, and it's there. I can share the link with you. So if you're interested in that.
So there are actually two more questions which have just popped up in chat box. Oh, thanks, Vit. And you can also see the questions. So Anubhav Anand asks, have you considered using the VR medium for more immersive experience? Example, as a Holocaust survivor, if you get more funding or bigger projects. What about VR immersive lessons for history students through the recreation of the event? So,
I think VR can be really extremely powerful medium for transmitting certain experiences, and I've seen some short movies or experiments in VR again in some exhibitions, and I was deeply impressed how moved, or how what is the emotional impact of this medium. So definitely it's a great idea. I think it's much more suited for exhibitions or for example museum installations. We really wanted to make a game which will be very easily accessible to a huge number of people. So that's I think that's still today that's the biggest limitation of virtual reality for me, that we wanted to make a game which anybody can play, you know, on almost any device, which or kind of reasonable device. So there's a high cost entry for VR. But I know people working on that, and I think it's a great effort. But we are not that's not the way we are heading right now.
yeah, well, very interesting. So Samuel Heine asks, Samuel, do you want to ask your question yourself, or should I just read it out? So thank you for this presentation. We saw some interesting examples of games about relatively contemporary events that had some oral sources. However, I wanted to know if you or your team had some reflection on how to make a game based on historical events with less available historical sources of information, or that are set in older historical contexts that only have written or iconographic testimonies. Okay, so
that's actually a great question. I think you can do that. You can actually definitely make a game, and you can actually see it's already kind of happening. For example, with Assassin's Creed, Odyssey, and the recent installments, they have some kind of like edu mode, or like explorative mode, where you can, for example, explore cities of ancient Egypt in 3D, and the cities are quite well modeled based on sources we have. Of course, it really what is fundamental is the problem with history and material culture that I would say, and I'm not a historian myself, so this is kind of like just my kind of guess, but I would say that for example, when we're talking about Second War, we really have very detailed testimonies about personal life, and about how people felt, how they're afraid, how they lived during Nazi times in occupied Prague. Where we're talking about, for example, ancient Egypt, it's much easier for us to have reliable sources about geography and like the material culture, what about the stuff they use. But I think there's only quite limited resources about the social history or social life. Of course, we have some, so that there will be probably much more. Probably the level of artistic freedom or historical speculation would be definitely higher. But these games can be awesome, and I mean, I would love to play a game from ancient Rome where I can live like one day as a Roman citizen, in different personal roles, in different social roles. And I think these games can make absolutely awesome addition to any history education, and I kind of expect they will in foreseeable future.
So, I mean, to follow on from that, I was wondering, how did you represent the history of the subaltern? I'm connecting your digital Arabs essay here or especially kind of groups which do not have this, shall we say, the Western or the Eurocentric kind of methods of archiving or history writing. which have a very different kind of method of history writing. But at the same time, it's difficult. It's perhaps unfair to deny them history, right? Not perhaps, it is unfair to deny them history. So how would you then kind of think of representing histories which don't come in the standard Eurocentric or so how do you think of presenting histories of colonized peoples, for example, and not from the colonial archives?
Yeah, I think here's the great. Again, I think what games are great in, even though some people think they are not, is telling stories. I think games are great medium for telling stories. And what you're talking about, especially if you can like whole cultures, which I would say are mostly based on, or their history and heritage is transmitted orally. These could be. I can imagine absolutely. I would love to play video games exploring these histories and these cultures. And I think and there are actually some examples, I would say, still like in very early beginning, but there are some examples of various either game designers collaborating with I don't know, for example, First Nations, etc., or people from these communities directly designing games about their own heritage and history. And I'm looking forward that there'll be more coming. But again, yeah, it's the promise with oral history is, again, it's very fragile, especially today. It's very fragile, and when the elders are passing, then yeah. So even now the games can be, and this is a game. The same actually goes to the virtual Holocaust memorial. That games can be actually a way, or game-like experiences. I don't necessarily say games, but interactive game-like experiences might be actually the medium for archiving and transmitting these fundamental human experiences to next generations.
So, well, if there are no more questions, then there is a question. Okay, so I'll just read it out. I was thinking about the role player's agency to make important choices play in imparting the emotional impact. As in, I was thinking stuff like this war of mine, making choices like whether or not to rob an old couple's meds to help the player's own members. So, I mean, can you clarify? Like, is this like a comment? I guess so. I was thinking about the role player's agency to make important choices, play in imparting the emotional impact. Okay, so yeah, I don't know. Do you want to?
I think that's one important aspect of games, is that they actually heard I've heard a kind of a good comment or quote, and I'm sorry, I have to go again through archives to figure out where I read, but it's so that like games are one of the few mediums that in which like that is like a fiction which make you to regret your own decision or your own action. And I think that's actually quite I mean, we know that there are more, for example, LARPs, like live action role-playing game, but I think that's actually really interesting element that game might enable you, or sometimes even force you, to make a ethically loaded decision, and then this can serve as a reflection that they actually might make you to think about it, to think about certain issues. And we know from various research, including I think our colleagues in Bergen on transgressive gaming, that sometimes when the game allows you to explore immoral acts or try to do something which would be considered like morally problematic, it can trigger a quite critical reflection of these elements. So yeah, I think that's very powerful. That's very powerful feature of video games, the player's agency, that you actually are the one making decisions, and also you are the one kind of who can see the consequences, or who can see the effects of your decision, including the impact on other people.
So I think you've already answered Oritro's questions, but Oritro, if you want to add to that, please unmute yourself and ask. Otherwise, well, we have time for one more question. Otherwise, we will be calling it a day today. So, yes. If there are no more questions, then we let us please kind of thank Vit for a fascinating presentation, and thank you all for attending this kind of session of Game Studies India Adda. We are back, and we will be. You have information about our WhatsApp group and our Facebook group. If you're, I think all of the people here are already there. In our WhatsApp group or Facebook group. But if you do want to kind of follow our activities, please kind of do feel free to join us on Game Studies India on Facebook, and we also tweet about our events. So thanks a lot, and thanks a lot, Vit, for making the time to come to this.